Hey everyone, I'm Diana Davison, an advocate for the falsely accused and wrongfully convicted. Now, I was in Calgary at the beginning of May, attending an appeal hearing for a man who was convicted after he'd already been acquitted in a previous trial. The media has only published one side of this story from the beginning. Leading up to the first trial, the reports featured the voices of the accusers. When he was acquitted, it was just an article stub. Then it returned to lengthy coverage devoted to the accusers the moment a retrial was scheduled. The media plays a role in wrongful convictions. The pressure on the judge in retrial was palpable. What happened in the appeal was even worse. Prosecutor Christine Rideout threatened the appellate judges with public shaming if they overturned the conviction. Surrounded by his family and friends, I sat in the gallery waiting for Allan Dean Griffin's appeal hearing to start. He's been in prison for about a year after his acquittal was overturned and he was convicted in retrial. When he was brought in by the guards, it was a rare and precious moment for him to see his whole family again, and he struggled to keep back the tears. Beside me, his mother tapped her fist over her heart, silently telling him to stay strong. The tragedy for the accused and his family has never been of interest to reporters. They don't care what it's like to hear the words "not guilty" and then 5 days later find out the nightmare isn't over. There is a good reason an accused doesn't want to speak to the press. Indeed, the only journalist present at the appeal hearing didn't report on a single word said in court. I'm not even sure why she bothered attending. The whole article could have been published after a phone call simply asking for quotations from the accusers. No need to travel to court at all. No need for the journalist to investigate whether or not Allan Dean Griffin received a fair trial. You know, the purpose of the appeal hearing that she was reporting on. I actually asked her on Twitter if she was in court because I couldn't tell after reading her article. Nobody seems willing to put this into blunt words, so I will. This country simply doesn't care about wrongful convictions anymore. Here's what the Cochrane Eagle didn't think the public needed to know. As the prosecutor at the appeal hearing said, while waving her arms about, Canada has decided that a complainant's testimony is sufficient to convict, and then every time it happens, we end up in appeals with them complaining that there was insufficient evidence. It's just another complaint, she screeched. She even suggested that appellate courts should outright stop hearing cases where the conviction was on sexual assault charges. Of course, when prosecutors want to overturn acquittals in sexual assault cases, well, the appeals process is the perfect venue. There was a vague, threatening tone to the first 10 minutes of prosecutor Christine Rideout's speech, indicating that the appellate court would be accused of supporting rape myths if they overturn the conviction. My jaw dropped, and I almost stopped making notes. It was stunning. To me, a clear attempt at intimidating the judges. But the journalist from Cochrane Eagle didn't find that part interesting. She didn't think you needed to know about that. The prosecutor also told the court that the judge did not commit errors of law, but if he did, it didn't matter, because those errors were just common sense. Seriously, you can't make this stuff up. So the error in question is this. Mr. Griffin said he sold a property and bought a new one in the span of a month, because he was told that his girlfriend was pregnant. As it turns out, she wasn't pregnant and gave birth 11 months later instead of 9. If he hadn't been told she was pregnant, they would not have lived together again. Whether or not she was actually pregnant is immaterial to his version of events. Now, the property he sold had tenants on it. The trial judge said he found it impossible that Griffin could evict the tenants and sell the property in a month. But no one asked if the tenants had been evicted. In fact, properties with tenants are sold quite often without evictions. But the prosecutor never asked Griffin about that. He waited until closing arguments and then asserted that the tenants must have been evicted and therefore Griffin was lying about how long it took to sell the property. The judge adopted that untested theory. They didn't need to know if the tenants were evicted or wonder if Griffin's ex lied to him about being pregnant. To this day, he's never been permitted to explain to the court how he sold the property so fast. And aside from never lying about rape, we're asked to believe that women never lie about being pregnant. So that's one of the bad reasons that Allan Dean Griffin is in prison right now. The reporter didn't think the public needed to know that the prosecutor thought legal errors are perfectly acceptable. Either that, or she wasn't paying attention to the hearing. So I asked her why. The Cochrane Eagle tweeted back at me that this paper will not help cast aspersion on women whose accused attacker has been found guilty in a court of law. Well, I replied, showing concern that a person receives a fair trial is not casting aspersion on anyone. Apparently, the public doesn't need to know that the trial judge accepted as true accusations which were proven to be impossible. The public doesn't need to know that a man is in prison for 9 years after the prosecutor used an impermissible ambush in closing submissions. Who needs fair trials anymore? In fact, with a sexual assault case, why waste time with a trial at all? Our judges are being threatened with public shaming if they don't convict on sexual assault charges. But that's not news. You know, it really isn't. We've seen it happening right in front of our eyes, splashed all over the headlines, and a new re-education bill in Parliament to make sure every judge gets the message loud and clear. These trials aren't about guilt or innocence of real human beings anymore. They are a numbers game. Anything less than 100% conviction rate is seen as an outrage. Now, these 3 judges in the appeal hearing may ignore the threat and make a decision based on the rule of law. Along with the family, we remain cautiously optimistic. What shouldn't be ignored is that judges are no longer free to deliver verdicts on sexual assault cases without the threat of putting themselves at personal risk. While the Cochrane Eagle continues their moral posturing, they ignore that half of their article refers to a victim for which Griffin was acquitted in both trials. They ignore that the public outrage over acquittals is due to the biased reporting of newspapers like theirs. How can a reporter attend a court hearing and not report a single thing said in court? Easy. Nothing said in court was helpful to the victim narrative. The prosecutor was a disorganized mess, made no legitimate arguments, talked in circles, and flailed her arms around to cover up her incoherence. This was an unfair trial. This is a man wrongfully convicted on accusations that were used to end a 6-year custody battle. Allan Dean Griffin is currently in jail for 9 years because he refused to give up trying to see his son. Sexual allegations in the midst of a custody dispute are commonly estimated at about 70% false. Allan Dean Griffin is only guilty of loving his son. The first judge who acquitted him saw that. The second judge bent the rules to overlook it. Parental alienation is not stunning and brave. It is a crime against children. Now, Griffin may never see his son again, but he will never stop loving him. And if the media wants to interview people with courage, they should talk to Dean Griffin's family. Despite all their suffering, they still hold hope for a legal system that has ripped 3 generations of their family to shreds. But apparently, that's not interesting news.